So far, we've been looking at very short arguments intended to illustrate certain principles about critical thinking and sound reasoning. In this presentation, we're going to begin to explore different dimensions of that foundation and look at some slightly longer arguments. We're going to analyze one slightly longer argument, and I'm going to step you through the stages of how to do that. And there will be some longer arguments also in the module as well to practice what you have been learning. The idea here is that most of the arguments we encounter, whether in daily life or through the media or on the internet, are not one or two sentences long. They're a paragraph long. They're a couple of pages long. In academic writing, arguments can be volumes long. And so the important thing to learn at this early point is that to evaluate an extended argument does not require us to master any additional skills other than what we've already established. So everything you know can now be applied just to larger contexts of information. And I'm going to show you how to do that in this presentation. So in evaluating an extended argument, we're simply applying what we've already learned when we were analyzing shorter arguments of one or two sentences. So if the argument is inductive, we try to figure out if it's strong or weak. If it's deductive, we try to figure out if it's valid or invalid. Now, in order to do this, we might have to do a little bit of analysis and reorganization of the argument to make it more clear. But once we do that, which is relatively straightforward, we simply apply what we've already learned, and we can determine relatively effectively if an argument is strong or weak, or valid or invalid. The extended arguments that I'll be analyzing in this presentation and the exercises I'm going to put in the module will be examples of inductive arguments. This is more along the lines of what you would typically encounter in daily life or in the media. So we'll start with one particular argument coming up, and then in the module you'll get a chance to practice some of the principles that we establish here. I really can't emphasize enough how important it is to work through the argument first with an open mind. Don't decide what it's about or what the person is arguing merely based on a title or your particular thoughts on the subject. Let the argument speak for itself. And that requires reading the entire argument, and I would recommend you do so and pay attention to things like premise indicators, conclusion indicators. Does the author tell you what they are arguing for? You should be taking notes as you read. If you find the conclusion, note that down, and then begin to write down the premises, paraphrase them. Don't just take them and put them down word for word, but make sure you understand what they're saying. Put them in your own words so you can see the relationship between the evidence and what the person is arguing for. And then by the time you've read the whole passage through and have taken notes, you'll probably have a pretty nice outline of what the argument is that can show what the argumentative or inferential relationship is between the premises or the evidence and the conclusion. And so we're going to take a look at a slightly longer argument that makes a controversial claim about certain foods that are popular in society these days. It's about organic foods and whether or not they're actually beneficial for us. This is not the original argument, which was an editorial. I've cut it down and edited it for purposes of this exercise, but I haven't taken out any of the substantive content, but I did try to make it more manageable for us. So here we go with the argument. Okay, so our first step is to read through the argument. I'm going to read through this argument here. It's relatively short, and as I indicated, you should be taking notes, trying to find the conclusion, and making notes about information that seems to be functioning as a premise. Here we go. Although many people believe that organic fruits and vegetables are more nutritious and healthier than conventional foods, this isn't actually the case. Fruits and vegetables that met the criteria for organic are on average neither more nutritious than their far cheaper conventional counterparts, nor less likely to be contaminated by pathogenic bacteria like E. coli or Salmonella. Moreover, many folks buy organic to avoid exposure to harmful levels of pesticides. Bad idea. Yes, non-organic fruits and vegetables had more pesticide residue, but more than 99% of the time, the levels are below the permissible, very conservative safety limits set by regulators. But isn't buying organic better for the environment? Nope. The low yields of organic agriculture, typically 20% to 50% lower per acre than conventional agriculture, impose various stresses on farmland, and especially on water consumption. So, save your money. It's more cost-effective, environmentally responsible, and humane to buy conventional food than the high-priced organic stuff. Okay, so this is what I've been referring to as an extended argument. As you can see, it's about a paragraph long. It's still not extremely long, but it does contain a concise argument. Let's take a look at some of the parts and see now, first of all, if we can analyze this argument into its component parts and then evaluate it to determine if it's a strong or a weak argument. So when we're getting ready to try to analyze an argument, the first thing we have to do, as we've learned already, is try to find the conclusion. What is the main claim the author is arguing for? Sometimes this will not be explicit, it'll be implicit, but most of the time the argument has a conclusion that is stated. And we learned that generally speaking, when there are no indicator words for conclusions, the conclusion is very typically the first statement within the passage, and that is what we have in this particular case. Here's the first statement. Although many people believe that organic fruits and vegetables are more nutritious and healthier than conventional foods, this isn't actually the case. So here the conclusion of the argument is stated indirectly. The conclusion of the argument is that organic fruits and vegetables are not healthier and not more nutritious than conventional foods. And this sentence is telling us that this conclusion that the author is arguing for goes against what is conventionally believed. And that's what makes this an interesting argument. It's saying lots of people think that organic foods are good for you. That's a conventional kind of dogmatic belief that's widely held, but it isn't really true. And now here's why. So this in itself is not an argument. This is just a statement about organic fruits and vegetables. The argument comes when evidence is brought to bear that supports this statement. So let's take a look at what the evidence for this conclusion might be. So once we think we've identified the conclusion, now we have to look for the premises. And the way I've edited this argument, there should be three fairly clear premises claimed to support the conclusion. So let's take a look at these individually. So what's one reason why we shouldn't eat organic fruits and vegetables? Well, the first premise is that fruits and vegetables that met the criteria for organic are on average neither more nutritious than their far cheaper conventional counterparts, nor less likely to be contaminated by pathogenic bacteria like E. coli or Salmonella. Now, keep in mind, when you are analyzing an argument, the crucial thing to focus on is not the conclusion. This is a mistake that many people make, and that's in part the reason why in public discourse especially, we have such an irrational environment. Here's what I mean. You may disagree with this argument's conclusion. You may be a big fan of organic vegetables. Maybe you're an organic vegetable dealer or an advocate. Let's say you have a blog, and you're really in favor of organic vegetables, and you see this argument that organic fruits and vegetables are not healthier and we shouldn't eat them. Your immediate reaction might be to say, well, I disagree with that conclusion, therefore it's a bad argument. And that's the exactly wrong stance to take, because it doesn't matter whether or not you agree or disagree with a conclusion. After all, I hate to break it to you, but you can be wrong. You might hold a position or a belief that has no justification. There are lots of people who hold those these days. What matters is not the conclusion and whether or not you agree with it or whether or not you like it. What matters is, where does the evidence lead us? What we should be focusing on is not the conclusion, but the evidence, the premises. The premises are really what's most important, because they are providing the evidence. And if the evidence leads us to a conclusion that we might be uncomfortable with or we might disagree with, That doesn't mean we can reject the evidence. That means we might have to change our minds and accept a different conclusion. So the first piece of evidence here against eating organic fruits and vegetables is the simple idea that they're not more nutritious or better for you than organic fruits and vegetables. Keep in mind, we don't have to worry about, is this claim actually true? When we're evaluating this argument, all we're looking at first anyway is the idea of, if it were true, would it lend support to the conclusion? So we adopt hypothetically this notion that organic fruits and vegetables are not more nutritious for us. That's premise number one. The second premise introduces another consideration, which is the idea that many people believe that by buying organic fruits and vegetables, you are avoiding exposure to pesticides. First of all, this is false. There are lots of organic pesticides that are used in organic farming, but that's not the way that this argument goes. It goes in the following way. It says, yes, it admits that non-organic fruits and vegetables had more pesticide residue, but more than 99% of the time, the levels are below the permissible, very conservative safety limits set by regulators. So this is a different premise. The first premise focused on the nutritional content. This premise focuses on the hazards of pesticides in the farming of organic fruits and vegetables versus conventional fruits and vegetables. And the third and final premise focuses on a completely different aspect of organic farming, that is the effects on the environment, and begins with a rhetorical question. But isn't buying organic better for the environment? Nope. The low yields of organic agriculture, typically 20 to 50% lower than conventional agriculture per acre, impose various stresses on farmland and especially on water consumption. And this has to do with the idea that organic farming uses a lot more water than regular farming and yet produces a lot less food in the end. So what we have here are three very different premises focusing on three very different aspects of organic fruits and vegetables. Now what we're going to do is put the argument together again in our simplified, paraphrased form in order to begin the process of evaluation. So to begin the process of analysis, I want to make two really quick points. First of all, as you're reading an argument and finding the conclusion and the premises, it isn't necessary to write them out word for word. I've done that in the previous slides merely to make them obvious. But what you should be doing is restating them and expressing them in the simplest terms you possibly can, because you want to make the argument clear and easy to survey in its entirety. So that's what I've done here. Another thing I've done here is I've put the argument in what we call standard form. If you recall the original argument, the conclusion came first and then all of the premises, and then there was a summary at the end. When we put an argument in standard form, we reorganize it to see the logical flow of the argument, and what we do is we put the conclusion at the end, and then we put all of the premises prior to that in order. In this case, 3 premises, so they go 1, 2, 3, leading to the conclusion. The real reason behind this is not very sophisticated. It simply allows us to see the argument all at once more clearly. So here the argument is restated for you. I've simplified and paraphrased all of the premises, and I've put the argument in standard form. So here's the argument. Organic veggies are not healthier than regular fruits and vegetables. Non-organic veggies are not unsafe, and organic farming is bad for the environment, therefore we should not buy organic fruits and vegetables. Okay, so that was step 1. We know what the premises are, we know what the conclusion is, and now, having analyzed the argument, we can easily classify this argument as an inductive argument. The arguments contained here are causal. That is, organic veggies will not cause negative health consequences. Eating organic veggies will not cause you to become healthier. And there are some generalizations, including the effects on the environment. And so this is an inductive argument. Therefore, when it comes down to evaluation, the question is going to be, is this argument strong or weak? Remember, we're analyzing the argument, not the conclusion of the argument. So now we know we're trying to determine, is this argument strong or weak? How do we do this? Well, we don't worry about the conclusion. We don't even worry about the premises in the sense of worrying about if they're actually true. We just assume the premises are true. What would happen if we made that assumption? If these premises were true, would the conclusion probably be true? And I would have to say, in my estimation, that I think that is the case. I think this is a strong argument. Now, when I say it's a strong argument, some people will say, well, yeah, but the conclusion isn't necessarily the case, and that's correct, but that's irrelevant because this is an inductive argument. So when I say the argument is strong, all I'm saying is, yes, the conclusion would likely be true if the premises were true. And that could range from 51% likely up to 99% likely. But yes, it could be false. It's not necessarily the case. When people pull that kind of tactic, well, it could be otherwise, they're talking about possibility. Anything is possible. But when you're arguing inductively, the focus should be on probability. So if these premises were true, I think the conclusion would probably be true that we shouldn't buy or eat organic vegetables. Okay, so far so good. If we agree, for the sake of purposes of teaching, that this is a strong argument, that doesn't necessarily mean the conclusion is true. It just means the premises would support it if the premises were true. That's what strong means. But that's not where evaluation ends. Having determined the argument is strong, we would then have to take the next step to determine if it's cogent. If it's cogent, that means it's not only strong, but that all of the premises are actually true, not hypothetically true. And so in order to determine if this argument were cogent, we would have to do a fair amount of work. We would have to do some research. We would have to go into maybe studies of organic foods, government documents. We would have to acquire basic knowledge about the facts of organic foods and organic farming. So establishing cogency is a big job. When I give you an argument to evaluate, I'm not going to ask you whether or not it's cogent, because that takes work. That's the important work that needs to be done in analyzing an argument in the real world, but for our purposes, simply being able to understand what it means for an argument to be strong or weak is sufficient. However, you need to realize that when you determine an argument is strong or weak, well, at least when it's strong, you're not done yet. There's still another level of analysis. Okay, so I think this argument is strong. Is it cogent? Well, I'll have to do a little bit of work to find out. So I've stepped you through a model argument, and I've tried to show you the steps you need to take to analyze, classify, and evaluate the argument. We have not really added any new ideas to our arsenal or our toolkit of argument evaluation. We're simply applying what we have already learned to arguments of greater length. This is a skill. It takes a little bit of time to get good at this, and so therefore I have placed in the module a practice exercise for you to work on where you have a relatively accessible, longish argument, and your task is to find the premises and conclusion, classify the argument, and evaluate it. This is intended to help you to apply and practice what we've learned here. So you'll find that in the module, and as always, if you have any questions, post them in the questions or comments, and I will do my best to clarify.